Welcome everyone to the Perspectives on Pastoralism Film Festival at the GLF Africa. This is the second session out of 4, and this film festival is hosted by CELEP, the Coalition of European Lobbies for Eastern African Pastoralism, which is a coalition of both European and African organizations, nonprofit organizations, research organizations, and other advocacy groups, community groups, pastoralist community groups, who are all committed to strengthening pastoralism worldwide and looking at how to create better systems and frameworks for having pastoralism recognized. So we're happy to introduce this session, which is looking at the livelihoods of pastoralism specifically, with 2 documentaries from Niger. Our guest speaker is Dr. Saverio Kretli, and he is with us from the UK. And he's the editor of the Nomadic Peoples Journal, which is a scientific publication. And he also has recently come out with the Pastoralist Development Orientation Framework with Miserior, which offers guidance on how to better approach pastoralism when going through development. So without further ado, let's watch the films. And while you watch them, remember to put your questions in the Q&A chat for the session, and we will address them in the time that we have afterwards. Thank you.
On about 40% of land on Earth, rainfall is highly unpredictable. Where and when crops and pasture will be able to grow can change from one year to the next. Food production systems that depend on predictability struggle to control these natural environments, even with costly investments. This option was never truly sustainable, and with global climate change is meeting its limits. But depending on predictability is a choice. It does not need to be that way. Highly variable natural environments actually offer opportunities for food production when producers specialize in being in the right place at the right time. Pastoralists are such producers. They specialize in making sustainable use of highly variable environments to produce food. By managing their animals' grazing itineraries to match the changing opportunities in their landscape, they can keep their herds in a relatively stable condition. They track beneficial combinations of forage plants and highest concentrations of nutrients. This keeps their animals on the best possible diet that only a variable landscape can offer. When they have the freedom to move to the right place at the right time, pastoralists make sustainable use of the natural environment and produce organically for domestic markets and export. Conventional food production systems that choose to depend on predictability need to combat variability to control the natural environment. With climate change, the natural environment is becoming even more variable everywhere. This is now our common future. If we learn from pastoralists, environmental variability can become an asset. They are walking the path to sustainable food production systems in the face of climate change. By sustainably turning environmental variability into food, pastoralists are already in the future.
Le bonheur, c'est le lait qui gicle en petites gouttes au moment de la traite. Ma mère me dit toujours ça. Waynaabe, c'est nous, les éleveurs de vaches dans notre langue, le fulfulde. Pour nous, elles sont tout, sont la vie. En réalité, elles sont des zébus avec des longues cornes d'une race qu'on appelle borologie. Les plus belles ont les manteaux rouges. Comme les oiseaux, nous habitons en brousse, sans maison, dans des petits enclos d'épinards. Et nous nous déplaçons toujours à la recherche de pâturage pour notre repos. Nous sommes les Wodaabe, les nomades du soleil. Voici Mooro. Elle est une bofide, c'est-à-dire celle qui couvre, puisqu'elle vient d'avoir son premier enfant, Jomare. Pour 2 ans, elle reste chez sa mère et doit s'habiller comme ça. Jomare était mal nourrie. Ça arrive chez nous quand il y a la sécheresse et les vaches n'ont pas de lait, mais elle s'est sauvée. Grâce à Dieu.
kulɓe jaɓi fatto ɓe jaɓi jaha joni min koƴo jarnir ɗum min tokko min tefo min gara seɗɗa seɗɗa na on ndugoto tuureɗi ɗi ndugo min kam joni mi fiiti goreɗi ɗon faama min to aha min joni mi hooti.
Pendant l'hivernage, l'eau est partout et nous utilisons les mares remplies par la pluie. En saison sèche, pour avoir de l'eau, pour nous et pour nos troupeaux, nous devons replier vers nos territoires de tâches où il y a des puits. Aller au puits, c'est un travail que nous devons faire tous les jours. Ce sont les hommes à puiser l'eau, mais ce sont les femmes et surtout les jeunes filles comme moi qui doivent remplir les bidons et les porter au campement. C'est dur tous les jours. Parfois, il y a des imprévus, comme quand une puisette tombe dans le puits et il faut y descendre pour la récupérer. Tout le monde est très inquiet pour le garçon qui doit descendre. Et on rigole pour chasser l'inquiétude. Chez nous, on fait toujours beaucoup de plaisanteries. Dans l'après-midi, nous les filles Préparons la farine de mil pour le repas du soir. Les grains sont d'abord mouillés et ensuite séchés pour les plier plus facilement. C'est notre nourriture pendant la saison sèche et nous l'achetons chez les agriculteurs puisque nous ne cultivons pas.
Onon amino amino ɗo to min goni bangana kulnayi ɗi mbaɗi nawɗum ɓernde kenan toon min jetta sarel min noddo sarel ɓe gadda likitajo AE wara o tufana min nayi ɓuri nata tabalde kula baldi min ɓe ƴamata ɗum fa so Allah ɓe dobo mi anda noy tagu wiɗata ɗum ɗum hayno ñarada ɗawɗa goɗɗo.
Aujourd'hui, Rissa, l'auxiliaire d'élevage qui travaille avec la Proxivect, la clinique mise en place par Vétérinaires Sans Frontières, vient vacciner nos vaches.
Lahiya amma na akwai waɗanda kamar ba su jin sosai. To kamar nawa ne Abbas lahiya? Kama wajen ko biyu na ko uku na ne. Biyu ko uku. To biyu ko uku ka ayi musu. Ka ayi musu. Wa'anga wanda da lahiya. Su za ama. Su za. An ka musu wa'anga uku da ya za a yi musu. Su ayi musu. To ma'adan.
Pour nous Wodaabe, le bétail non seulement nous donne le lait, mais il marque tout le moment important de la vie. D'un homme ou d'une femme, de la naissance à la mort. Depuis le taureau égorgé pour l'imposition du nom, jusqu'à celui sacrifié pour la sadak, pour honorer les morts. Il ne nous donne pas seulement le lait. Nous tenons beaucoup à nos bêtes et leur santé est notre premier souci. Si une vache tombe malade, tout le monde est très inquiet. Dans le passé, nous avons perdu des troupeaux entiers à cause des maladies. Maintenant, nous savons que c'est possible de prévenir la maladie avec une piqûre, la vaccination. Le temps est arrivé du grand rassemblement annuel du clan, le worso, et tout le monde accourt. À cause du bétail, nous les Wodaabe ne pouvons pas vivre groupés. Mais pourtant, nous sommes unis et très solidaires. Le worso, c'est la joie d'être ensemble, de se retrouver avec la famille et les amis, après la souffrance de la longue saison sèche. C'est aussi l'occasion pour fêter toutes les naissances et tous les mariages de l'année. Le premier jour, on égorge des taureaux pour sacraliser ces événements importants. Tout le troupeau doit être montré et seront les familles à choisir les bêtes pour le sacrifice. Une réunion des anciens, la soura, organise tout ça.
Kay foso ɗon ndi mawdi ra on ɗo woddata ndi mawdi kunnigel pamarel jaɓci kam wala ase ɓeydu sembiɗin kam mi nanay kam
tappandi na hondu kam ila ɗo tappini
ina wiya hondu ko kon tan kam kanko tappini kuma kadi miya e mo kadi ma onon ɓen hollete mi on leekom ayye noon ce nan alaji ko haani ma kunni a fandinina an kam soɓata minon darata e goɗɗo minon darata e goɗɗo amen to deydey to Allah balla Allah balla e haqqo
Tuer même un taureau n'est pas normal. Tu ne peux pas faire ça à la légère. Il faut purifier les mecs qui ont tué et le couteau aussi. La viande est coupée selon des règles précises. Elle sera cuite dans la nuit. Le worso, c'est aussi l'occasion pour les jeunes de se connaître. Les garçons se maquillent pour danser le yake et le rume et renouveler ainsi la tradition des Wodaabe. Ils le font aussi pour nous plaire, pour être choisis par une surbage, c'est-à-dire une jeune fille comme moi. Nous aussi, les filles, nous nous maquillons pour être encore plus belles. Le roumé, c'est notre danse. Filles et garçons sont ensemble dans la nuit. Les filles derrière les garçons qui se déplacent en cercle, lentement. Un garçon, le soliste, au milieu du cercle, chante tous les louanges pour une fille très belle. Et tous les autres garçons répondent. Le worso est terminé et la saison des pluies aussi. Tout le monde se déplacera vers le sud et se dispersera pour surmonter la saison sèche. Pour le petit veau ne sera pas facile, mais il est fort. Il descend de lignage important et nous, les Wodaabe, nous veillerons sur lui. La saison sèche arrive après la saison des pluies et la saison des pluies revient après la saison sèche. Ce qui compte avant tout dans la vie, c'est le mugnal, la patience.
najje ɗo najje tufoyje ɗo gara so fiɗa ilma je ko horana tumuɗe e duniya kewa
Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed the films. And we have our first question for Dr. Saverio Kretli, which is if you can tell us a little bit about the process of making the film Herding Chaos. And then we'll dive into the questions that have been posted on the message board, the Q&A for the session.
Hello.
Thank you,
Hello,
Saverio.
Margareta. Hello, everybody. Hello. Well, I mean, making the trailer really is a teaser. It was meant to find funds for the real documentary, and which never materialized. But that was done in 2008, and the idea was to film at least the beginning of the rainy season. And we managed, but it was quite, as you have seen, quite complicated. We spent about 3 weeks in the camp waiting for the rains, and then when they arrived, they lasted for 20 minutes, and we were running around with this camera with a little plastic sewn on it, with this kind of little dress made by a tailor in Tower a few weeks earlier. To protect it from the rain, but of course it was catching the wind, so it was very difficult to hold it steady. And by the time we managed to put it on a tripod, was already the rains were already over. But still, yeah, it was quite an experience. We also find it very difficult to film during the day because the camera wasn't supposed to film above 40 degrees. Now they use within maximum 40 degrees, and of course during the day was 52 in the shade. So after 1 minute we had it on, it was impossible to hold it. We had to cover it with damp clothes to be able even just to use it. So yeah, it was quite an intriguing experience. I'm full of admiration for Francesco, who managed much more complicated scenes than we did.
Thank you for giving us that insight, and it really shows us what a privilege it is to have access to this intimate space of these Wodaabe herders and their families and their lives. And in the first film from Francesco, to have the perspective of women in the community coming forward and having these very close scenes of people's faces and being able to really get to know some of the pastoralists through that process. But technically, as you just said, it's also quite difficult to get that across. So it's really great that we were able to include these two films as part of the film festival to get to know some of these pastoralists. And as you say in the film, what can we learn from them as well in terms of turning unpredictability to an advantage? And I think that brings us in a very good way to the next question from the audience, which was posted about, is it possible to control nomadic? These are the costs of soil erosion in Africa. And there was a bit of an exchange on this one where there was some commentary about soil erosion of pasture lands during movement. And there have been quite a few different responses, but I'll let you give your take first on soil erosion and mobile pastoralism.
It's a bit of a strange question, but I presume the person who asked it starts from the assumption that there is a link between soil erosion and pastoral mobility. I don't really know. I've never heard of it. I don't know whether there are places where this happens. Certainly, in the case of the Wodaabe, moving, if anything, would reduce the chance of land degradation. And I imagine that soil erosion is included in land degradation in this case. So that's all I can say. I don't really have any experience of soil erosion linked to mobility, unless it thinks that just by virtue of walking a path, the animals will create a ditch, which will then become a canyon within ages. I haven't seen anything like that in Niger. It might happen somewhere else. I don't know. I very much doubt that pastoral mobility is a main cause of soil erosion.
Thank you, Saverio. And there was a follow-up on this question, which was looking at how issues of agrarian types of food production often create bigger damage in terms of deforestation and clearance of farmland. So really then emphasizing, like the response was emphasizing how the mobile pastoralism is actually can be a benefit to the landscape and much more gentle to the landscape. So perhaps you want to comment on positive aspects of the grazing, like how it can affect different vegetation communities, for example.
Yes, I mean, one doesn't want to launch accusations against the poor farmers in the drylands either, who certainly are not having a much better time than pastoralists. But it for sure, if there is a connection between crop farming and land degradation, that is usually through the introduction of new technologies which dig deeper, create digger ditches, and therefore the possibility of move the soil, uproot the plants, and so on. So, but yeah, this is well known. I mean, it's nothing really strange. Before we close, I want to share with you that after 10 years, I've seen Jima again this morning, because there is some research going on in Niger, redoing the research of my PhD, and we had a brief conversation in Tawa. They had moved to Tawa for the data collection because of insecurity, and so I saw Abdoulaye, who filmed part of the scenes with me, who was my research assistant at the time, and learned how to use a camcorder specifically for doing this. And then I saw, Jima and his cousin, and they are still in the bush. They're still with their animals. Obviously things change, but somehow it was quite intriguing to see them again.
It's great to stay in touch and stay in contact. It speaks to the quality of the work that you were doing in that community that you were able to sustain those relationships?
Well, I remained in touch with my research assistant. With Jim and Aldo, and the herders in the bush is more difficult because they're in the bush, so they don't have a network most of the time. Now they have a mobile phone, so it would be a bit easier. But I would still need to work through an interpreter to talk to them. My Fulfulden is not nearly good enough for a phone call conversation in Niger.
So we have another question here, which is managed pastoral open grazing or cattle ranching? Which is better for the environment in terms of soil health, waste runoffs, and then it stops.
I suppose it depends. It depends very much on how much pastoralists can work as pastoralists, and it depends on the general orientation of cattle ranchers. Some cattle ranchers do pretty well, some not well at all, and some pastoralists are not able to work as pastoralists because they cannot move. They have been prevented from moving, or they don't have space to move, or don't have enough animals to move anymore, and therefore they do what everybody else does, which is sort of try to get by and survive to the next day. But when implemented when pastoralists can do what they prefer to do, then pastoralism is known to be very sustainable. In fact, obviously very sustainable. Most of the protected areas in Africa are areas which have seen pastoralists for centuries. And when the conservationists arrived and decided that they were good enough to be protected, well, they found pastoral areas effectively in most cases.
Thank you. I think actually one of the major contributions in your scholarship is really showing how important that mobility is. And then right now in CELEP, that's also a really important part of the advocacy, is raising awareness about the importance of these mobility issues and how there needs to be more support from local governments in terms of recognition of communal lands, and also the ability to have cross-border movement of animals. So yeah, it really speaks to a lot of those issues, is when there's the possibility for that mobility, then pastoralism really fulfills a lot of the goals of sustainability by producing meat, milk, and textiles in ways that don't bring in fossil fuel inputs and corn and all of these different feedstuffs. So it really shows us, as you say in the film, that there is a different way of having food production and a different way of having a relationship with the land.
Indeed. I mean, mobility has a totally unnecessary bad press, and especially pastoral mobility. In fact, we seem to be pretty happy to have everybody else moving around a lot, from commuters to airplanes and so on. And for some reason, pastor is moving 150 kilometers in a year seem to be a problem still, and when everybody else is moving thousands. So yeah, I still find it very difficult to understand why there is such a problem with pastoral mobility. It has to be seen as a flexibility, has capacity to interface the variability in the environment in such a way that makes it possible to use it, which is what many other professions do, without raising any particular objection.
Thank you. So we have another question here posted in the Q&A for the session, which is coming from Danielle Momo Conte, and it says, in Njala University, Sierra Leone, we faced a great challenge of scarcity of water during the dry season. So what are the ways you'll recommend to conserve water during the raining season? So this is, yeah.
I think I'll pass this question. Is beyond my competence and beyond this context. I have no magic solution for water scarcity, but the rainy season and dry season, I've been there for a long time, and to see the rainy season or the dry season as water scarcity is a way of looking at it. It really depends on how much water you want to use and how much you need, and what you use and what you need depends on the way you live. Scarcity is always made, it's never found.
Yeah, I think a big issue also is in terms of looking at the mobility of pastoralists is that they often will move towards sources of water that's been stored already in natural aquifers and capacities when possible. So that's something that the mobility, when there's really the opportunity of mobility, that then they would in some ways be following the water. Although of course, droughts have also come at different period. So perhaps you might want to speak a bit about the cyclical patterns of droughts over the years and how that has created a misconception about pastoralism not having enough access to water.
Well, there is a general understanding or a general narrative that droughts, especially in the Sahel, have become more frequent and sometimes even more intense. I am not aware of data on rainfall that substantiate this narrative. Certainly, the data prove that rainfall patterns are more variable and even less predictable than they used to be. Whether it rains less per year and whether it doesn't rain enough more frequently, so to speak, I'm not sure the data confirm that. For sure, the experience of people on the ground is that droughts are more frequent. But from the point of view of people on the ground, drought is especially pastoralists, is the difficulty to access good enough pasture. So for them, the experience is the difficulty to access good enough pasture. And that difficulty can be caused by many reasons, not only by the poor precipitation that year. And one of the main reasons why they might experience a difficulty to access good enough pasture is the fact that mobility has been constrained, which is their main strategy to access good enough pasture. So not surprisingly, when the main strategy is undermined, then everybody experiences a more frequent condition in which good enough pasture cannot be accessed, and they call it drought.
So thank you so much, Saveri. I think in that last bit, you really summed up a lot of different important issues that need to be considered, how to look at pastoralism in a new way rather than just recycling these old narratives that actually don't hold traction when you look at what's happening on the ground. So that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for joining us. And one quick announcement that I'd like to make before we get cut off is that this film festival is also supporting the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralism, which has been put forward in the United Nations to be recognized in the year 2026. So that's great if you can do what you can to support that. And we have a call for films for the second edition of the Perspectives on Pastoralism Film Festival. So just find our website, pastoralistfilmfestival.com, and you can submit films there or refer others who you know who have films to submit their films for the next edition. Thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget that we have 2 more sessions tomorrow, Speaking Truth to Power and looking at global perspectives on pastoralism. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.